For a conversation on the future of mobility and autonomous driving, please welcome co-CEO of Waymo, Tekedra Mawakana, with Atlantic contributor Derek Thompson.
I'm so excited for this conversation. There's a famous line from William Gibson that the future is here, it's just unevenly distributed. It's hard to think of a company that's better or more true for than Waymo, because you go to some cities, San Francisco, Phoenix, and there are Waymos, self-driving cars everywhere. I mean, truly in San Francisco, you cannot miss them. But meanwhile, there's dozens of cities where there's not a single Waymo car. And so the future here is very literally unevenly distributed. Why don't you talk a little bit about where the company is right now, where you're operating and where people could see your self-driving fleet?
Great. So we're currently operating across 5 U.S. cities. And when I say it, in case you've never ridden in a Waymo, what I mean by that is we have a Waymo app, and you download it, and you use it to get you from point A to point B. In 3 of those cities, and in 2 of those cities, you can access us through an Uber app. And so those cities are San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Phoenix are the Waymo One cities. And then in Austin and Atlanta, you can get us through the Uber app. And that's, we've been experimenting with different partnership types. We've also already announced that later this year, you can also find us in Miami. And then next year, we've announced Washington, D.C., Seattle, Denver. I know, I love it. A little bit of applause. Dallas. And then earlier this week, we announced that we, through a partnership with Lyft on the Waymo app, will be in Nashville. So it's a really exciting time. It's been a pivotal point. We're giving hundreds of thousands of trips per week. That's one of the questions is this a novelty or are people actually taking rides? And just also to orient everyone, there's no one in the vehicle other than the passengers. And so we call this a rider-only experience. And so when you get in, you either sit in the back seat or you sit in the passenger seat, but there's no one behind the wheel and there's never any confusion about who's driving. The technology that's driving you safely from point A to point B is what we refer to affectionately as the Waymo driver, and that's who's in control.
Safety is so critical here. I mean, I think people who aren't familiar with self-driving cars, one of the first bumps they're going to have is, why in the world would I trust an AI to drive me throughout the city? I mean, think about the fact that when people use ChatGPT, it's broadly understood that the technology will hallucinate, get facts wrong, basically 1 every 2-3 answers. Now, it's not particularly important if ChatGPT hallucinates some false answer to the question, what was the Habsburg Empire? But if the Waymo driver hallucinates or fails to see something in front of them, that's a catastrophic accident. So why don't you talk a little bit about what you've seen in terms of the safety record of Waymo?
Yeah, it's really important to us from the beginning to figure out how to actually not only create a framework, we call it our safety framework, which is publicly available on our website. We have a safety hub. So how do we figure out how to do this safely? And then how do we figure out how to be transparent about it? So earlier this week, our most recent study, we've driven over 100 million, what we call RO, rider-only miles to date. And based on 96 million of those miles, we've been able to determine that the Waymo driver is 5 times safer than human drivers in all serious injury-causing or fatal accidents. So that's something that we're very proud of. And then if you add in who's at fault, which is some work that we've also done with one of the largest insurance companies, Swiss Re, on a report that they published, they actually determined that the Waymo driver is 10 times safer than a human driver. And so it's really through the scale, the rigor, the culture at the company that we've been able to get to the point where I can sit here and talk about these things. Before we had our hypothesis and our speculation, but it's really exciting now to have the data and be able to say to you all that every city in which we are operating, we know that we're making the road safer.
I really want to slow down on this point here, because that was not a pun, I just hang out on this point. Okay. Because we just had a conversation here about public health. And, when you think about a vaccine that reduces the risk of death by an order of magnitude, that's considered a public health win. It's considered a mitzvah for civilization. There's a way in which the ability to reduce driver accidents and vehicular mortality by an order of magnitude should also be thought of as a public health achievement. I mean, tens of thousands of Americans die every year of accidents on the road, whether they're behind the car, in the car, or a pedestrian on the street or driving or riding a bicycle. And sometimes you'll see this. There's a very famous graph that looks at how much America spends on healthcare versus our longevity. And it basically shows that Americans spend way more than any other country on healthcare, and so our longevity should be all the way up here, and instead our average lifespan is all the way down here. And this is sometimes represented to suggest that our healthcare system is at fault. In fact, when you decompose the reasons why America has a lower longevity, it's often because we die young. And we die young of overdoses, we die young of cardiometabolic disease, we die young of gun violence, and we die young because per miles driven in the US is much more dangerous than other countries, and we drive so damn much because we're a big country. I mean, this is an extraordinary, not to puff you up a little, but to puff you up here and then ask the harder questions later. I mean, it is an extraordinary achievement.
I'm not falling for it.
To create, right, yeah. To create what is equivalent to a vaccine for vehicular death that is now being scaled across the country. I mean, how seriously do you take this as a mission of Waymo to not just get people from A to B faster and without a driver, but also to save lives?
Yeah. Well, feel free to come on our show any day you'd like. No, I mean, you're really speaking to the mission of the company. I mean, our mission is to be the world's most trusted driver, but what you're getting at is the why. The way we think about it is like the status quo is something we've all accepted, but it's unacceptable, right? You talked about it's 40,000 Americans a year dying on the roads. People are drunk, distracted, tired, angry. And you know what? And once you start talking globally, we're talking about 1.35 million people a year being killed on the roads. And so to us, this is the why behind the mission. Like this isn't, this is sort of thought of as the, technological challenge of this generation. I can say also it's like the commercialization challenge, which is like, how will people adopt this? How will policymakers think about it? And so when we think about it, at the end of the day, it's about saving lives. It's about making communities safer. There are economies that get disrupted by us deciding that that's most important. And that's part of that's the deal we've taken, is we want to save people's lives. And so you've really made the point that we make every day.
All right, well, let me ask harder questions now. The first two cities that you rolled out in, Phoenix, San Francisco. Famously, no weather. San Francisco, God waved his hand and it's always autumn. Phoenix, it's always summer.
There's fog in San Francisco.
Yeah, it's a foggy autumnal situation.
Okay. But that is an autonomous learning challenge.
I see. No, that's true. Yeah, right.
Okay.
That's true. You're
and
slowly adding.
Haboobs, which are sandstorms in Phoenix.
Okay, right. No, this is fair. But you started in places that didn't have snow.
Yeah, that's right.
And Waymos are not commonly used on highways.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you're trying to solve the problem of weather, in particular snow, and the challenge of driving on freeways?
Yeah. So what you're really getting into is kind of the way we think about building out the driver capabilities over time. You're right. The markets that we're in right now are largely, weather environments that the Waymo driver has a lot of experience in. I'll start with freeways first. We are, as employees of Waymo, taking freeways every day. Across Phoenix, LA, and San Francisco, highway driving is happening, and it's something we plan to start to incorporate into our fleet this year. And so this will start to become publicly available. But we have a very iterative approach. Often the question is, could you go faster? And it's like, we are going very fast, but we really work on creating the foundation and making sure that it's stable, and then we go faster. And so freeways are coming on board. We've tested across 25 cities, well beyond the cities that we're operating in, and a lot of that has been weather testing. And so we've been in Detroit in the snow, we've been in Seattle in the rain, thunderstorms in Miami, et cetera. And so that's a capability that you'll see us bring online. It'll take a little longer. It isn't so much the snow coming down, it's that the roads completely change when there's snow. And so there's a human understanding of whether or not or how you're going to navigate the situation when you cannot see literally around the corner at all because there's a snow mound. But then maybe there's a snow plow right there that's bringing all the snow towards you. It just takes more experience, right? This is machine learning and AI, and so the driver just needs more cycles with those. And so we're taking it slow, but we will have snow.
I want to talk a little bit about the bottlenecks to growth and to full national success. And I also want to talk about what some of the costs or unintended consequences of full national success could be. But before we get there, why is Waymo a taxi service rather than think of your company as selling cars to individuals who can then flip a switch in the car and turn what is essentially a human-driven car into a Waymo-driven car? Why did you go the route of taxis rather than what most of the car industry is, which is selling a machine to a person?
Yeah. So we are a technology company. Autonomous vehicle technology is what we are focused on. Every use case that requires a human driver is a use case that we believe this technology can make safer. And so we started with ride hailing for a few reasons. One, it allows people to actually get access to the technology. In these early days, this company has been around for almost 16 years. In the early days, the technology was very expensive. And so it's important for us to have user adoption, work with policymakers, make sure that we can be in markets, give people exposure. People start out and they're like, you put your kid in there? And I'm like, yeah, I put my son in there. And they're like, I'm never putting and then their parent gets in, right? Like someone in their 90s gets in and is like, oh my gosh, my life is better. I'm never driving again. And then everyone's like, great. That's kind of what we wanted. But the point is that there's a real sort of adoption journey here. That's one. So we started with ride hailing. Two is, as our technology becomes more and more capable, we're very focused on other business models. So we have done local delivery of grocery in San Francisco with Safeway, as well as with Uber Eats in Phoenix. And so that's something we'll continue to do. We utilize the same fleet as with ride hailing. People love it. They don't have to tip. It's really interesting, how people feel about going outside to pick up their food, but not having the tip. And then we had a business around Class 8 long-haul trucking that we paused, but that's something that we're still focused on doing. We have a partner in Daimler Trucks, and eventually we will do that. What we know is that these are, very long routes for truck drivers, and usually they don't have a route back. And so thinking about how this autonomous technology could actually improve some of those job categories, which is something near and dear to me, because my uncle was a truck driver. And then lastly, what you're talking about, which is licensing the technology. There isn't a mindset that if I license you a car and tell you you can sit in the passenger seat or the back seat, that it's not going to be able to take you everywhere yet, right? And that's part of it, is we want people to understand that this technology is working in certain places, and then by the time that automotive companies license it from us, they'll be selling, the Waymo driver sort of integrated into their cars on their showroom floors for many years to come. And that's the strategy we've always said. We've always been focused on personal car ownership as an ultimate opportunity as well.
So the technology works. I want to know why it isn't everywhere. And one reason why it's not everywhere might be that there are human barriers. There could be regulatory barriers. There could be labor barriers. If you're a truckers union, you might not want to put a Waymo driver behind your truck. But there's also, I have to imagine, technology barriers. There are millions of cars on the road, and if you actually had the dream of replacing, and I'm not suggesting this is the full dream, of replacing the entire fleet with Waymo cars, the manufacture of millions and millions of cars takes a long, long time. There have to be hundreds of millions of cars in America. What's the harder barrier for you right now? Is it the human barrier, or is it the tech barrier?
Yeah, I think so we are focused on building the driver, and we partner with automotive companies to buy the cars. So our fleet right now are Jaguar I-Paces. We have a future fleet with Zeekr. We have another fleet coming with Hyundai, the Ioniq 5. We've announced a partnership with Toyota. So there are plenty of people to build cars. That's not the challenge. This should really be about efficiency, right? Just because there are millions of cars in cities today, if these cars are actually able to be utilized optimally without a human behind the wheel and sort of, have the ridership on demand when needed, and that's all, you should need fewer cars everywhere. So we're not as focused on the challenge of how do you scale manufacturing vehicles. It's more like, how do you utilize a fleet in a way that no human system could ever do? Certainly, it would require full-time humans. Everyone would have to be very, very clear. And you also need to understand all the demand curves. With Waymo, we understand that network. We're managing the city demand. We have a set number of cars that we're deploying, and then we're making sure that the fleet utilization is optimized. So that's the way we think about both from a business model perspective and when I think about the future. When you hear me rattle off these markets that we're going to go into, we're going into them with the hopes of not just making the roads safer, also making the transportation more efficient. And we only use fully electric vehicles, and that's a big part of it, too.
If you succeed, if you scale at the rate that you're currently growing, and I think I recently read that...
what's up with all the ifs?
Well, when you succeed, fine. When you succeed.
Can we get a win?
We'll get a win.
We are succeeding.
Right.
Like, we are leading this nation in autonomous vehicle technology. This is something that, we should all feel very proud of, because this is, the greatest manifestation of AI in the three-dimensional real world. And it's happening. And so that's my only, if you succeed, it's like human drivers aren't succeeding.
However, driving a car is, by some definitions, the most common occupation among American men. If you add up the Uber drivers and the taxi drivers and the Lyft drivers and the truck drivers, it's hard to see another BLS-defined occupation that has more employed men. In a world when you succeed, there is going to be a direct threat to these jobs, because if the stats are real, and I believe they are, you are offering a means of transportation that is 10 times safer than the status quo. Do you think about the costs of success to the labor market?
I do. I think about the cost of success to a lot of aspects of society, the labor market being one of them. I think it's really important to be, very clear that certain jobs will go away and other jobs already are getting created. Some of our partners, AutoNation has all of these technicians around the country. They have certifications now for technicians for autonomy, right? Like, those jobs didn't exist before, and those are really important jobs. Similarly, we have fleet integration partners who are actually taking the Waymo driver and installing them on these base vehicles that we're buying from automotive companies. Those jobs didn't exist before. Also, it goes back to the point I made before. Like, we've been without a human behind the wheel 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 5 years next month in Phoenix. And we do curbside pickup at the airport. We can take you downtown, ASU, out to Scottsdale, to all the spas, whatever. Plenty of people have not lost jobs because it's an efficient way to travel, to get from point A to point B. I'm not saying jobs won't be lost, but I'm saying, with efficiency, it's not that all the jobs are going to go away, and we're creating jobs in every city in which we operate.
I really think that driverlessness, and you've pointed to this, it's more than just taking a driver out of a car. It really does unlock a different way of thinking about mobility more generally. So I remember when I was reporting on this story, and when I rode in my first Waymo maybe 8 years ago at the Google X headquarters. I was talking to some of the folks there, and they made a really interesting point, that if what you essentially have, a car we think of as a person plus a steering wheel plus wheels themselves, but a driverless car is an autonomous room. And what's the potential of an autonomous room? And they said, well, right now, if you want something from CVS, right, you go on to, you walk to CVS, you drive to CVS, maybe you order something from some digital service that brings it there, but there's no self-driving CVS that you can just hail to come right by your apartment, townhouse, home, and then you walk into the room that is CVS that drove to you and shop there. What does shopping look like, they said, in a world where rather than drive to the mall, it's the mall that is hailed to drive to you? What are some of the more interesting and surprising implications of driverlessness that you think sort of autonomous rooms unlock?
It's so funny. I always love this question, I have to tell you, because it's like people who love yoga are like, when is it going to be a yoga studio? And like everyone.
I just love CVS so much. I just love going there and just buying my crest.
This is like my first time being like, when is my pharmacy going to? I mean, I think what you're saying is right. Like, I think we're starting at the other end of this journey, which is like cities are just trying to figure out, do I need to spend another $50 million for another parking structure? Or could that actually become a more interesting and usable space for people who pay taxes in this city? Like, we're at that end. But on the other end, I think you're exactly right. These will become moving living rooms, moving conference room tables, moving yoga studios. Maybe there would be sort of businesses that are interested in sort of having moving delivery. I think we're pretty far from that still. And that's because for people who don't have this technology available in their backyard, they're just not thinking about not going to CVS yet. But I think if you're talking about over the next 20 years, how this technology will evolve and impact people's lives, I think it's, you know, the sky is sort of the limit in terms of what it enables, and also what kind of partners kind of come on that journey also. Because for us, it's been important to have like an ecosystem. You know, we have these automotive partners, we have partners that integrate the technology into the base vehicles. We have, you know, network operating partners like Uber and Lyft. We have fleet operating partners. You know, it's gonna take an entire ecosystem for the kinds of changes that you're talking about. Right now, we're just laser focused on scaling this technology now that we've been able to successfully manage these 5 cities.
The hype cycle of self-driving cars is so interesting to me, because I remember when I started reporting on this in 2014, 2015, there were a lot of people, not necessarily you, who said, you're going to see self-driving cars taking over the roads in 2020. Yeah. In 5 years, this thing is going to take over your lives. 2020 came. There were like no self-driving cars. I mean, there were like 3, but practically none. 2022, I think it was fair to say at that moment, like self-driving cars have been like kind of a bust. We were promised them 7 years ago. They're like the next jetpacks, right? And then slowly everyone stopped paying attention. Not everyone stopped paying attention, but like there was the hype pulled all the way back.
Yeah.
But as hype pulled back, reality moved forward.
Yeah.
And now I just saw a report that self-driving miles in California increased by a factor of 8 in the last 12 months. I mean, this thing is surging. I wonder what it's been like for you as you've sort of observed and maybe even ridden some of these hype cycles to perceive something that's maybe like a classic Gartner cycle where you have this enormous, you know, a peak of excitement and hype, and then like this trough of not necessarily disappointment, but the physical world is difficult, it's regulatorily difficult, it's just hard to make a robot that can see the planet. And now you're on the other side of this. Like, what has that been like for you?
Yeah, I think it's really a testament to the team at Waymo. I mean, I think people join the company because of the mission. It is hard work. It is hard work from an engineering perspective. It is hard work to get policymakers and communities to appreciate and understand how this technology could actually bring value to the residents and the visitors in those ecosystems. And at the same time, it's a show, not tell. And so, and third, you can't get the technology from beginning to end in a lab. You have to have the technology out on the roads. This is, you were talking earlier about healthcare, and in the olden days, before the COVID vaccine debate, that was one of the ways that people thought about this, is like you're exposing some measure of risk in order to improve for public safety reasons, right? For those outcomes to come. And so I think that process, you know, whether it was a hype cycle or not a hype cycle, the team was just laser focused on pushing through what we had to do in order to make it happen. I think where it became really exciting is as riders started talking about their experiences. Like, Everyone else has all these opinions but doesn't actually know what it takes. Then you have the people who are very, very negative and, sort of don't mind the crash economy. There's a lot of benefit that comes from the crash economy. And so those people are very upset about it. But now you have these riders, and they're the ones who are deciding every day with their, time and energy and pocketbooks, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to put my kid. I mentioned to you, we launched this teen product in Arizona. That's an example. People want to put their 14 to 17-year-olds in these cars so they can stay at work during the summers where no one knows what the heck to do with these kids at 3 o'clock every day, right? It's a really sort of interesting opportunity to observe who's gonna decide. And at the end of the day, who's gonna decide is the riders. The people in the communities who need this technology to actually make their lives better. They talk to their policymakers, they talk to the influencers in their community, and they're the ones who start demanding it. And that's, to me, if you look at the sort of hype to now, it sort of, I guess, ends with this kind of plateau of productivity. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, I think the communities are going through this elation and delight in a way that we had hoped that they would.
Well, I get on a train to go back to Washington, D.C. in about 5 hours, and it sounds like your fleet opens in Washington, D.C. in about
Next
5
year.
months or
Yeah.
something. So I look forward to another leisurely ride in a Waymo. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you.